that it was fit that our mediator should be both God and man in one person, that so he might partake of the nature of both parties, and be a middle person between them, and fill up the distance, and bring them nearer to one another, that he might be in a better capacity to communicate unto us his benefits, and that he might be capable of performing what our redemption required. We see then how much it behooved Christ to be man as well as God, and indeed both. For a mediator is a mediator between two, Galatians chapter 3, verse 20. And those two between whom a mediator must go were man and God. And therefore it is said that there is but one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. And this was most fit. For first, hereby he participates of both natures, and so his person doth bear a resemblance of the work in general. Mediation was the business, and who so fit as a middle person? Therefore, first he became a middle person and then a mediator. First, a middle person in regard of participation of both natures, and then a mediator in regard of reconciliation and reconciling both natures. And a middle person not in order only as men are between angels and beasts, and as a middle rank of men are between those above them and under them, but of participation as having the nature of both. A middle person not in place only as Moses when he stood between God and the people in Exodus chapter 5 verse 5, but in person. A medium, not only between God and us, but one with God and us, and symbolizing with both. Therefore our divines say that his works of mediation, whereby he mediates for us, arises from his person, that they arise from both natures, so as both natures have an influence into all his works, and they are the works of both, so that he might be a whole, entire mediator in his person and in his works. And secondly, hereby he is of equal distance and difference from both. As he is God, he differs from us. As he is man, he differs from God. Yea, and as he is mediator, he takes on him a differing person, as it were from himself and what he is essentially, as being only the Son of God. For he became lesser than himself in his office, and emptied himself, and so is a fit mediator between us and himself also, as he is the Son of God. The Son incarnate differs ministerially from what he is in himself naturally. As we say in philosophy, one and the same thing is differenced from itself by a different manner of existing. Thirdly, hereby he is indifferent also between both, so as not to take part with the one more than with the other, ready to distribute to both with unequal hands their due, and to be faithful to both. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17. That he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in the things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the people. Lo, here are the matters both of God and man referred to him. For the cause of both was to be committed to him. Therefore he partakes of both, and is distant from both, as a middle thing participates of both extremes and touches both. Fourthly, he was to make peace between both and take away hostility. Therefore he takes pledges both out of the earth and out of heaven. He takes the chief nature on earth and the chief in heaven, thereby to still the enemy and to part us who were fighting each other, we against God and God against us. Now having our nature and God's, he had two hands able enough to part us. He could take hold of God's strength, hold his hands as in Isaiah chapter 27 verse 5, and so make peace. And having our nature, he had a hand to take hold of our hands also. Fifthly, he hereby is able to draw near to both and bring both together, and so make us one. For is not he fit to do this, that is both God and man? He joins our nature first with God in his own person and makes both there one, that so God and man becoming one in person, he might the easier make God and man one in covenant. God and man were at a division. He, by this means, is in a friendly way able to treat with both, and hath a hand to shake with both. He has become the man God's fellow. Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. If he had been God's fellow, and not the man God's fellow, he might have drawn near to God, and yet we have been never the nearer. And yet, if not more than man, and so God's fellow, which no mere man could be, he could not have approached to God, as Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 21. And their nobles shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from the midst of them, and I will cause him to draw near, and he shall approach unto me. For who is this that engaged his heart to approach unto me, saith the Lord? Who but he could have engaged his heart or assumed the boldness to have drawn near to God? And yet withal, he being the man, God's fellow, we may draw nigh to him and come to God by him, as the phrase is in the epistle of Hebrews. For why he comes out of the midst of us, as in the same, Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 21, thus in Hebrews 4, verses 15 and 16. For we have not an high priest, which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy, and find grace to help in the time of need. And Hebrews 10, verses 21 and 22. And having an high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. Sixthly, he could hereby communicate the benefit of all that he did for us unto us, which without it had been not done. He partakes of ours, that he may communicate to us his. We are to participate the divine nature. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4. And therefore he takes part of ours. If we were to have righteousness from him, it was fit our nature should be the fountain. John chapter 17, verse 19. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they may be sanctified. I, that is, my deity, sanctifies myself, that is, my human nature, which he calls himself, because it was one in person with himself. It was fit that the nature that sinned should be sanctified to condemn in the flesh sin. Romans chapter 8, verse 3. And hence it is that benefit of his righteousness is not extended to angels, because he that sanctifies and them that are sanctified are one. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 11. Which he and the angels are not, and therefore his merits reach not in a proper and direct way unto them. The intense worth indeed of his benefits arise from his abilities and sufficiency personal, but the extension from his so proper fitness that he was a man and therefore reached only to men. Seventhly, that which he was able to do for us required he should be both God and man. For consider but the principal parts of the work that he was to do. And it was fit that he should be both, that what did not become one nature, the other might do. Number one, he was to keep and fulfill the law, and be subject to it, and to merit by keeping it. Now if he had been not man, he could not have been subject to the law. Therefore he was made of a woman, and made under the law. First therefore made of a woman, that so he might be under the law. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. And if he had not been God, he could not have merited for us by that his keeping the law, for he had done but what was required, and what was due, and so it could have reached but to himself. For all creatures, when they have done all they can, are but unprofitable servants. And he that merits must do it by his own strength, for otherwise, what hast thou that thou hast not received? 2. He that is our mediator must die and overcome death, for he was to rescue us from death and destroy him that had power of it. Now if he had not been man, he could not have died. Therefore he took such a body as we have, that he might die. He could not have tasted death else, in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man. Verse 14. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had power of death, that is the devil. And if he had not been God, he could not have raised himself, Romans chapter 1, verse 4, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. Therefore John 10:18, I lay down my life, saith he, and take it up again. 1. He had not had a life to lay down if he had not been man, for the Godhead could not die. 2. If he had not been God, he could not have merited by laying it down. It must be his own, not in the dominion of another. Now the lives of creatures are not their own, therefore their laying of them down cannot merit. 3. He must have it in his own power. If another could take it away, he could not have merited, for it must be a voluntary laying it down. And there is no mere man, but another may take away his life from him, if God prevent not. But Christ, having his life wholly in his own power, resigned it. Therefore the centurion said he was God. Matthew chapter 27, verse 54. 4. He could not else take it up again. None ought to die but man. None could give up his life and resume it but God. He had the passive power to die as man, the active power to die of himself as God. 5. And so for enduring the wrath of God, if he had not been man, he had not had a soul to be heavy to death. If he had not been God, it had died through heaviness, if the Godhead had not upheld him that upholds all things. 6. Also he was to be a judge, and that he could not be unless he had been God, and also an advocate, and that he could not be unless he had been man.